Anytime you rely on a curriculum to teach the people in front of you, I'm sure it's going to be fine, but you're going to miss some people and you're going to miss some kids, and you're not going to get that extra connection of you to the students and the students to the material. And like, I get that it's harder, but it's kind of like my old principal used to say. She used to make the schedule and she would spend the whole summer doing it, and it was wild. But every kid needed to be where they needed to be. And I was like, how do you do that? And she said, everybody can do it. It just takes time, and you have to be willing to put in the time. And I feel like this is the same. If you're willing to say to yourself, I know the end goal, I know what I want you to know by the end of this semester, but I'm willing to wait a week or two to get to know you, find out where you're at, find out your likes and dislikes, what you're good at, what you can connect with. You can get all those same goals and have the kids excited. You just have to put in the work, and you can't get that from a written on paper curriculum.
Welcome to Imagining Possibilities for Music Learning and Teaching. I'm Evan Tobias, Associate Professor of Music Learning and Teaching at Arizona State University, and I'm so happy you're here. This is an invitation to pause and reflect not only on what music education is and how we can do what we do better, but to consider what music learning and teaching could be, to imagine possibilities and move in new ways. Ready to design, update, expand, or transform your music program? Let's imagine possibilities. Hey, music educators, welcome to Imagining Possibilities for Music Learning and Teaching. Today we're continuing a podcast episode that's a part of my research project on music educators' experiences and perspectives with music curriculum and curriculum development. If you'd like more context on the project and the podcast, go check out episode 1. Today you'll hear from Sean Lebrun. This conversation happened in 2024. There are a lot of really great moments throughout this conversation where I think you'll find yourself going like, do I agree with this? Do I not agree with this? Where am I on this? And I think that's what makes it a really great interview. At the end of the interview, I'll share some takeaways. So let's get into it, and I'll catch you on the other side. So Sean, how do you like to introduce yourself?
Sean Lebrun. I teach choir at the high school. I've taught middle school choir for a long time as well. And my current classes are also very varied with theater, public speaking, songwriting, guitar, some other stuff that I'm already forgetting. But just lots of classes, very diverse, and it's great.
That's great. And can you describe a little bit about, maybe some of the different kinds of classes you teach and how sort of curriculum works with them?
I teach choir, and the curriculum is essentially set up for, I assess whatever the students need to work on at the beginning of the year, and then I choose songs for each concert that can delve into a little bit of what they need to work on and improve. Anything from a song that has interesting things for tone and rhythm, and another song has something for a different style of tone, and then maybe working on different dynamics. And then we do the winter concert like that. I reassess for the spring and do it that way. And then in between, we work on all music stuff. For things that are intro to guitar or guitar-based things, I approach them like I approach most of my classes, theater classes, public speaking. It's more of an organic curriculum. So I always have a sense of what I want to happen in the year, but it's really important to assess the students in front of me, especially at the high school level, because if I run a class for seniors, it's going to be wildly different for needs and expectations than it is for freshmen. So if I try to approach the same material in the same way, the seniors are going to say, I've already done this material. You're not teaching me anything. And the freshmen will say, this is way beyond. So I take the general ideas, and then I essentially write new lesson plans each semester, which is work. But I love it because it really makes it active and something that the students can always grab onto. It's always at the level that they're trying to achieve at.
Yeah, that's great. To get a sense, are you the only high school in the district, or how does it work in terms of your curriculum in relationship to anyone else's curriculum? Or is it just kind of your independent curriculum?
Gotcha. We have a couple elementary schools, but only one middle school and then one high school.
Okay, I see. So that's great. So you have full control over your curriculum. Is that fair to say?
I sure do. And I will collaborate at times, because at the high school, I do these classes. But as of right now, I'm teaching general music at the middle school. So there's another teacher at the middle school also teaching general music. So we can collaborate if we wish to, and we generally do. So the students will learn generally the same things. But we always cover what needs to get covered in the foundations for Massachusetts frameworks and get at it that way. But they pretty much let me, whatever I want to do for curriculum, I write it.
That's great. And do you have a fine arts coordinator?
We do not.
Okay. Okay.
We don't even, so this is the first place I've worked in a situation like this. A lot of the departments like history or math, they'll have a curriculum team leader,
Uh-huh.
and that person is a point five working, point five
Oh, okay. Interesting.
CTL. We only have a liaison, so they have nothing to do with our curriculum. They're literally just the go-between between our entire district-wide music department and whatever administrators need from them.
I see. Okay. All right. Interesting. So if, I'm curious about your own education around curriculum. Did you have any formal education or classes of any kind that related either directly to curriculum design or that kind of touched on it?
Yeah, I went to UMass Lowell with a 5.5 year program, and they had graduate classes that were directly related to curriculum in general. So it
Hmm.
could be applicable to any subject that you teach, not
Oh,
just me.
interesting.
But in my undergrad classes, we had music education classes with the person who was in charge of the program. And that's where I learned everything about how to make a curriculum, but it was in a different way. It wasn't just a here's paper, here's curriculum. It was a show and tell version,
Hmm.
which was infinitely better.
Yeah. That sounds great. What were some takeaways that you remember?
Oh my God, it was great. So Dr. Greer was my professor, and I must have been so terrible to have as a college student. I acted like a high school student in college, and I've apologized to her since. But I literally learned everything from her.
Uh-huh.
It was unbelievable. But what she did is, and this might have been graduate school, but it's been a while.
Sure.
So, but essentially, what we would do is we would have a class with our classmates. And then for another class, we would go out to a local school, and in groups of 3 or 4, we would teach that class.
Hmm.
So what she did for those classes is when we all met, we would just meet. And instead of a, hey, everybody, here's the assignment, we would just sit down and she said, you guys are going to read this kid's book. And then we do it. And she says,
Hmm.
write a song about it. And now switch songs. And now put this song and write a new story to the song. And that'd be the whole class.
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, my group figured out pretty quickly, but it turns out not everybody else did, that she was literally having us participate in the lessons that we could go do in the next class every
Yeah.
time. And what I loved about that is, one, always getting the sense of what it's like to be a student in that class. So
Hmm.
you get a feeling of these transitions and do they feel right? But two is the sense of if you try to nail down a curriculum, you're going to be like public schools are every 5 years, where they say, hey, grit is the new thing. And then in 5 years, they're going to say, grit makes no sense. Here's the new thing.
Hmm.
If you go past that and you zoom way out to what's important and you start with what you want them to learn by the end and you walk back, make the right transitions, every lesson is a good lesson. Everything makes sense because you're creating it for who's in front of you. That's why I make my curriculum the way I do.
Yeah, thanks for that. What about in terms of professional development since school? Has you had any professional development or encountered any professional development related to curriculum and any thoughts on that?
So, some stuff I've already learned, and some stuff is not relatable, and some stuff is just wrong. And that's what I find out of all the PDs that I take.
Oh, interesting. Can you share any of the wrong stuff? I would be curious about that.
God, anything that is, what's the best way to say it? I guess it's almost like if you believe in general that there is a deity that rules over things or has created things, then if you all believe in that, then you're that right. That's a good way to go. But then
Uh-huh.
if you create some super specific religion like the spaghetti monster from 20 years ago,
Uh-huh.
you can just tell that it's wrong because it's way too specific and is only applicable to certain people in a certain situation.
Mm.
For us, that means if you're not talking about students in my demographic, students in my socioeconomic culture, students at my age, anything you say is wrong because it's so applicable to what that person said. And I feel like that's 90% of what I hear. It's, it's a great tool. And I'm like, you know what? I bet it's not a great tool because that's not going to work where I work. So I try to avoid things like that.
That's really interesting because a lot of the folks who I'm talking to, and especially with the surveys, there are a lot of people who are talking about specific resources, and it didn't really show up a lot in your responses. You kept referring back to your more organic approach, and I didn't see like, oh, I draw upon this curricular package, or I use this resource and things of that sort. Is that related to what you just said, or is that a whole other thing?
No, 100% that's related. Anytime you rely on a curriculum to teach the people in front of you, I'm sure it's going to be fine, but you're going to miss some people and you're going to miss some kids, and you're not going to get that extra connection of you to the students and the students to the material. And like, I get that it's harder, but it's kind of like my old principal used to say. She used to make the schedule and she would spend the whole summer doing it, and it was wild. But every kid needed to be where they needed to be. And I was like, how do you do that? And she said, everybody can do it. It just takes time, and you have to be willing to put in the time. And I feel like this is the same. If you're willing to say to yourself, I know the end goal, I know what I want you to know by the end of this semester, but I'm willing to wait a week or two to get to know you, find out where you're at, find out your likes and dislikes, what you're good at, what you can connect with. You can get all those same goals and have the kids excited. You just have to put in the work, and you can't get that from a written on paper curriculum.
Yeah, that's a great point. All right, so I'm going to give you a prompt and you just finish the prompt however you like. Curriculum is...
Useful, but not necessary.
Go. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think that sometimes we forget that we have two main goals, and one is a skill set of music, and the other is a love of music. And I think curriculum isn't always the right word that gets you there. I think it's the experience of us being a guide who is hopefully very knowledgeable and skillful, and walking our students on the journey that we can't even see in front of us to get to a point where we agree we love music, we feel skilled at music. And I guess the third point I should have said before, which is they should be able to say, I want to continue with music, and here's how I want to continue with it.
Yeah. In one of the parts of your survey, you were talking about this idea of processing ideas and transferring them to a student population. How does that work for you, and what does that mean in your program?
Everybody is so different, and they come from so many different places, and they all hear information differently. It's the same reason that I always tell students, if you're working with a singing teacher, even if you love them, take a few classes with another singing teacher. Mm-hmm. I love getting in guest speakers, because as much as I may feel competent at what I'm doing, sometimes they need to hear it in a slightly different way. So what they need to hear is all of the things we've learned as musicians. They need to get here. But in order to get here, we need to process what that information is, where the root of it is, and then reformat it to give it to them in an envelope, in a package that they can unzip. You know, like on your computer when it says you don't have any apps that can undo this. That's like if I try to give them this information and they go, yeah, my brain has no apps that are going to tell me what you just said means. So It's our job to reprocess that information and give it to who's in front of us in a way that they can accept.
So it seems like there are some things that you know that you want them to know. That's sort of like the things that you have as the ends that you're talking about. And then you also talk about an organic approach, which I want to ask you more about later. Do you have, I guess, a set of go-to things that are like, these are the things that I will be addressing, or does that also change each year based on the students?
I do have that, because I've been teaching for long enough that I've seen such a wide range of students. Mm-hmm. I have lessons that can be applicable for what they need. So the best way to describe it is, let's say I have 100 lessons that I've done in the past years, and I know that this year I have the time to do 50 lessons. I assess what my students can already do and what they can't already do. And then based on what they can't already do, I choose my 50 best lessons that will address those needs. So that by the end of their time with me, they will be at the point I need them to be at without doing a lesson that they don't need. So if my students can analyze music well, we'll do it so I can make sure that it's really there where I need it to be. Mm-hmm. But that won't be my focus. My focus may be on composition or history throughout the year, so that they become the most well-rounded individual by the end of the semester.
When you say needs, what do you mean by that?
I have some students who have a great understanding of how to write music, what music should be. This person's ear that I'm thinking of is just fantastic. Mm-hmm. But they don't have a great sense of where music came from. So their perspective is limited when trying to come up with new things. So a lot of students in that class were actually the same way. They were great at writing it, but something would come up, or they wanted to be more diverse in their composition, and they just had no pool from which to draw. So I took them through a lot of music history, because they didn't know much about where their favorite musicians got their inspiration from. So by going through this music history and listening and analyzing and comparing music, that was their need, because they weren't proficient at that yet. But by completing that, it also made their composition better. So that's kind of where this organic part comes from. I'm finding out that this will help complete that knowledge they don't have, but I know it will also make them better at the thing they're already doing.
So it seems like you mentioned you're finding out as they come in that you're, okay, here's where they're at. And I'm sure it's like differentiated across the many students that you have. And then at that point, it seems like you decide on, okay, here's the set of lessons that I have or the stuff that I've done before that will fit for this group of students. Am I kind
That's
of right
correct.
with it?
And a lot of times it is similar because if I'm working in the same town, the demographic is going to be the same. And a
Hmm.
lot of times they've had the same teacher before me. So,
Mm.
once you're somewhere for a couple of years, you're going to say, yeah, this is typically what these people need. But like you said, just like it's differentiated from class to class for me, each student is also differentiated. So when I have my little one-on-one sessions with students after maybe a bigger project or something they completed, that's what we discuss. And I
Yeah.
have different expectations. Same, rubrics for everybody. But I always tell students that, grades are so not important. They just mean absolutely nothing to me. And they just cause students who love something to have more anxiety about it
Mm.
because they're trying to change what they love into something where they're trying to make me happy. And students who don't love it are even worse off because they're like, well, I'm just not talented at music. Without realizing music isn't talent, it's work and it's fun work. So I take that time to say, what do you need? Like I said before, how do I differentiate in the classroom? And then how do I differentiate based on each student's and what I should expect out of you and what's going to make Tom grow more than Jerry will grow in that area and what they need.
Does that mean they end up doing different projects or different versions of projects? Like, how do you sort of calibrate to all these different individual students?
Because I work in a public school, I have to make sure that the rubrics are the same, that their grades can be matched up to the same rubrics, because that's what's asked of me here,
Uh-huh.
and that everything can be expected the same of the students on paper.
Uh-huh.
But I set up a relationship with my students where they understand that what I'm looking for out of them is 100% effort. So I tell them, if you give me a product and you're great at music and you do less than you can do, your grade will change based on that because effort's a big part of my class.
Mm.
So while we're doing it, we essentially walk into a situation where after about a month, the kids realize, oh, he's just looking for me to do the best I can do at this project. So the differentiation happens within the student because they can say, oh, I found this really cool thing. Can I do it? Can I change your project? And I'll typically say, go for it. What this leads me to is students who really like the concrete method of thinking and completion get that out of this class. They know how to accomplish it. They're not concerned. They say, I know that as long as I'm putting in my effort, I can do it. My best students get to push themselves as hard as they want to go. And my students who need the most work on music don't have to worry about a bad grade because the rubric is set up in a way where it's a goal that's accomplishable, but they're still able to push further if they want to.
Yeah, that's great. I love that differentiation. So for each lesson and project, when you're talking about the things that you have in mind towards the end, are they skills, concepts, like what guides each? What's the focus of each lesson? Or I don't mean like tell me 50 focal points, but like
Right.
how are you deciding which to use when or what they're doing for you and the students?
I like to think of it as a through composed semester.
Oh,
So
interesting.
each unit leads me into what I feel like is going to really vibe with the next unit. And I
Uh-huh.
always end up covering everything.
Uh-huh.
But I'm learning as I go. There's no way to do a really good pre-assessment in, the first three classes. I'm still getting to know them as people.
Sure.
They haven't really let me see themselves, which is reasonable. You know what I mean? I don't know how their brain works yet. But let's say we start off and we do something on music genres, and their job is to show me the difference between these two artists and their genres, similarities and differences. As we do that, I get a feel for the class. Did they really like this physical working, or were they looking to work more on computers? And when they did it, is this a class where they wanted to push the limits of my project, or are they really sitting back and saying, I'm still waiting to see what you want to give me? And
Mm.
sometimes that happens throughout. And then I just do a vibe check. And that's really what it's always been. It's
Mhm.
what am I feeling? And whatever I'm feeling, I notice is what they're feeling. And hopefully, after a month and a half, my class and I are vibing well enough that we all agree this is going to be really cool to do next. And it's my job to just help them get there.
Yeah, and I guess because you've been teaching for a while, you just have, like you said, you have like 100 different things at any point that you can draw upon, like almost like a library of
Yeah.
options.
Yeah, and if I don't have something that I can think of, because I usually just keep it all up in the noggin up here, because I'm just, again, it's all organic and vibe checks. So I like to just keep it as I remember that thing. And if I don't have something, I
Uh-huh.
just make up a new lesson. And I'm like, well, what I have doesn't fit that. What do I really want out of this? What are the parameters of what I need? And then I go, this would be cool. And I mean, it goes, websites pop up. I just found the website every noise at once, every sound at once, whatever it is. It's from the guy who made Spotify or does the algorithm for Spotify.
Oh, interesting.
It's so cool. They split up genres because I found this when I was looking for the difference between genres because it's such a tricky subject.
Oh yeah, look at this. This is so cool.
Oh yeah, so they split up the main page where the very top of it, I believe, is the most intense and upbeat, I want to say. Electronic on the top, most organic on the bottom. The right side is the most dedicated to rhythm, and the left side, things like whale noises, have no rhythm at all. And if you click on it, it will give you a sample of it. And then if you click on the red arrows, it'll bring you to a page where it'll show you all different genres in a box that also follow that same one, but they're close. And then if
Yeah.
you scroll down, it'll show you the exact opposite of that genre and also things that are close. It's so cool. And it looks like such a beta website because it's not really put together super duper well, but there's just information. And it really helped my students not only figure out the difference between genres, but just discover new things. And that opened up like 8 new lessons I made when I was
Yeah.
like, whoa, we just crashed. Let's turn it up again and do something cool.
So for like things like learning genres, like is there a list somewhere, I guess, up in your head too, of like, here are the things that I want them to be able to do? Like if each lesson or project has a sort of focal point of they're going to learn genres in this one, they're going to learn X in this one, is that somewhere? Is it just like you're figuring it out? Or is it like the project is the thing and then you figure out what they might learn as they're doing it?
No, it's what do I want them to learn? What is this class showing a dearth of? And then what can I do that's going to supplant that? That's going to give them the skills or knowledge they need to get that. So I 100% start with just like chorus. I say, let me hear your tone. I go, ooh, we need to work on this. So I'll find a song for that. Same with the class. What do we not know about? Oh my God, you guys don't know about genres. Clearly, I need to go over genres.
So how do you figure out which, I understand that it's based on what they might not already have, but how do you figure out ultimately at the end of the day, I only have X amount of time in a year. These are the most important things for them to know before they leave.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. It sometimes it depends on the class. And I will say, we're being recorded. I 100% go by the Massachusetts frameworks at all times, for sure. No question about that. I definitely cover every single one of those, and that's my main priority. But if, let's say, I wasn't super focused on that, which even though I am, because I love the new frameworks. They're
Mm-hmm.
very vague in a great way, which lets me be able to do this. So I can cover this stuff. What I'm really trying to say is those two factors from the beginning. It's I want to give you skills and knowledge, but I want you to love music and I want you to find a way you can continue with it. I did a project a few years ago and it was composition and it was very open, which for some kids is tough. A lot of things in my class are tough, which is why it's more about just doing your best. But
Mm-hmm.
that idea of vague, that idea of what does it take to get an A in this class, that anxiety goes away when you tell kids it's effort based. And they go, yeah, but I don't. I'm like, you don't have to be good. This could be the worst project of your life. But if I see you work in the whole class and you ask me questions and you follow up, you get 100 no matter what. All of a sudden they feel free to explore. And the project did it a while ago. It was composition. And the kid said, well, what genre, whatever. And I said, no genre. It's just whatever you want, get after it. And it felt weird because I felt like I was going to have some students do some things that weren't what I wanted. But I also knew that that was a me feeling and not a pedagogy feeling. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I let it go. And just like with little kids in art, you don't say that's a cool elephant. You say, what am I looking at?
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me about your picture. I do the same thing with music. I never say, this is what I'm hearing. I always say, tell me about what you're making. So these two kids were sitting there. They were off on their own and they weren't coming up much, but they were always working. And I went over and everything sounded very ethereal. Everything sounded very out there. And it's not my kind of music and I don't get it. But I don't have to. It's not for me. It's for them.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, do you need any help? And they said, no. And I checked in twice a class minimum. And after a couple of weeks, I sat down and I said, okay, show me what you got. And it turns out what they were making was video game music for a specific video game that they liked,
Okay.
certain
Yeah.
style. And I never would have made a lesson for that because I don't know that and I don't know how to approach that. But by leaving it open-ended just enough that they had the latitude to explore that, these two kids had found something they 100% loved. And they continue, even afterwards, they would come up during lunchtime and say, can I just work on music? And I said, great. But again, because I left myself open and because I left it with just enough structure to make it something they could achieve, but not so much structure that they had to fit into something I felt, they found themselves in that project. And that's what I hope for every project.
Do you ever find that with that openness and students taking things in different directions that they end up learning things that you didn't intend for them to learn or that weren't even on your map of the stuff that I'm going to teach this year?
100%. That's what I hope for. I have a vague idea of where did this music come from, history, and where's it at now, genres, and composition, how do I make music, and music analysis, how do I listen to music? Those are really my big things for music. And I think they really help a person find themselves somewhere in that realm. Just like in college, you can be music history or education or whatever. My hope is that these kids push way beyond what I give them for a project and find things that I had no intention of them finding. It's almost like saying we're taking a walk through the woods. I don't know what they're going to find on their walk through the woods, but all I can do is teach them how to look. And then whatever they find, I say, I also know about that. And then we turn that into something else and I let them take that rabbit hole. But yeah, that's why I love what I do. That's that point.
It's really interesting because when you look across the field, if you think of like a continuum of like openness and specificity, there are some folks who are sort of aligned with your perspective of like, keep it open and let's see what kind of emerges. And then there are other folks who are like, I want a scope and sequence that plans out all the very specific things I want them to learn almost like to the month. So how would you respond to the other end of the continuum from your perspective as someone in the more organic space?
I think that there is so much to get out of both of them. I almost wish that I could have a co-teacher who had that specificity and they could get both of them because I think they're important. I see this so much. I saw it in college and I see it now as a gigging musician. The people who learned how to play by ear and the people who love sheet music. And nobody's better. And I wouldn't pick one over the other. But in different situations, they have strengths and weaknesses from those skills. I do understand the weaknesses of what I have as a thing, which is as a presentation of curriculum, which is that some students will walk out and they won't be able to say, here's what I learned, 50 things, and here's what I got out of it. They might, I will say I do an assessment after every semester and I have the students go back and try to list every single lesson that we did without looking online. And they pretty much always do it, which is awesome because that's my assessment. That's saying, do you remember the projects? And they do. The one thing they don't always get out is what did I learn out of that project? So the negative is there. Now, the positive for me is it's my assessment in class to say, I know you learned what I wanted you to learn. You just can't say it in words. With that other method of teaching, you do get students with a concrete knowledge of, I learned this in class. The negative, the reason I don't do that is because they don't get to find things that I didn't give them. And sometimes they're not accessing the music in a way that makes them feel like they can continue or that there is something to continue with. I feel like they're more reliant on that educator or an educator to take them there more as a teacher, where I try to be more as a guide. Again, I'm not saying one is better than the other. I prefer this one, but I understand that those people have real goals and students succeed very well in those situations as well.
Yeah. But to your point, you're doing assessment all the way through. So you have an understanding of what they understand as they're going through, even though they might not articulate it in the same way that you might, right?
Yeah. I mean, students in my classes all the time say this is the easiest class ever. And yet they're working hard the whole time. They're having fun, but they think that because they're having fun and doing a project that they love, they're like, well, this is an easy class. I'm like, no, this is a fun class. But like you have other classes that you go to sleep in. Those are easy classes because you didn't do anything today. So it's my job to assess. And that's why I do a lot of one-on-ones with students. I check not just, did you do the project, but did you actually know what you were doing when you did it? And if a student or a group of students can complete a project to, a rubric I set up, but I kind of find out that they just did the project and they didn't get the lesson out of it I wanted, I set up another project in which they can find that lesson, which is, how do I create music from the beginning? Something that happened this year. And I go, ooh, you did it, but you didn't get the lesson. So we run it again in a different fashion until they get the lesson I was looking for.
Yeah. It's very responsive. I still have the Every Noise website under your picture here, and
Yeah.
it's like I'm imagining almost like a version of Every Noise for like everything that the students are learning in your class. It seems like it would look something like this, and you could click on it and find, oh yeah, that connected to this lesson, and this student as a better representation, or I shouldn't use the word better, but like an alternative representation to what students are learning than like a grade, like you said, which is sort of reductive.
And that's what it is. Grades are so reductive. And what I'm really hoping is that the lessons that they learn go straight into their long-term memory and subconscious. That's where I want them. I want them deep in their subconscious where they now don't think, oh, okay, I've done steps 1, 2, and 3. I'm ready for step 4. They're just going, here's a project. I don't know how to achieve it, but I'm comfortable starting a project I'm uncomfortable with and saying, I hope I have it. And those skills from the past, they pop up as if they did them themselves. I had a student teacher last year and the year before, and they would teach classes, and I was trying to tell them that I know that I've succeeded in that aspect.
Mhm.
If students think that I didn't do much this year and that they came up with everything on their own and did it on their own, because that means that they've not only taken agency over their learning in their future, they believe that they've come up with it. And they know, ooh, I have skills because I came up with this thing out of nowhere. Now, I
Mhm.
know how I set them up for that, but
Yeah.
they did it all. And that makes me feel good that I'm not needed anymore.
Yeah. That's, it's like you have to not have an ego in order to get to that place, I imagine,
Oh,
or at least
God,
put
yeah.
it somewhere else.
That's what it is. It's not that I don't have one. It's that I have to not tell it. I can't. They're like, oh, the kids did great. I was like, yes, the kids did great. They did all the work this year because our job is to grow them into real people and real
Mhm.
musicians. And we can only do that if they feel like they've accomplished something without us. Like a parent saying, yep, I didn't do anything. I didn't parent you at all. You're now just an adult and I taught you nothing. Good for you. And they'll figure it out. Not now.
For a while, we were talking about sort of openness for students in projects, but you also had mentioned when you were talking about the standards, like the vagueness in a positive sense. Can you kind of come back to that for a moment and speak to vagueness and specificity in terms of standards? Because I hear both perspectives across the field of what people are desiring. Some people wanting things that are more open and vague for interpretation, and other people just tell me exactly what the thing is that I need to teach.
Yeah, I think that's related to how these same students that we see as children grow into adults. Some people love to say, what's on the board? What do I have to do? Give me that A. I've now played the game and won the game. Other kids say, I don't want the game. I want to do some stuff and I want to experience the world and I don't want you to tell me how to do it. Those kids grow into adults because adults are just tall children. And we just say, either tell me how to win this game of doing my job as a music teacher because I need to know I did a good job. And then I'm on the other, and again, I'm not putting that down. I'm just saying that's
No,
I
sure.
believe mindset. And then there's my side of I'm like, I know when I do a good job. I don't want you to tell me I'm doing a good job. But what I do want is a general guideline. So the frameworks now, they say stuff like that. The frameworks will say, make sure they're composing essentially, make sure they're doing this, make sure they're doing that. And I do cover all of those, which is kind of what I meant earlier. And that's why I like how they're vague, because if I'm ever thinking like, ooh, I want to think of something new to cover, some really smart people with some great ideas gave us a great guideline towards maybe cover some of this stuff, but do it how you want to do it. So I really think it's just different styles of humans, type A's, type B's, and how we like to feel accomplished at the end of the day.
If there was a greater degree of specificity, which you sometimes like, if you go to the national standards and you look at like drill down to the performance standards where it's like 3.4.2 or whatever, how would that sort of impact your way of sort of being as a teacher or your approach to curriculum?
Gotcha. As I said before, I would definitely pay attention to all of it and do all of it for sure, making sure I'm hitting all of the points. This is recorded, so I gotta make sure I say that. But I'll be honest, the more specificity just makes me upset. I don't like being, and I know this is a personal thing for me. I like to be fully creative. I like to be fully immersed in what's happening. It's like the Meisner technique for acting. It's
Mm,
just being present and being there and responding to what you're seeing. I think that's actually what I love about teaching And as far as I've heard back, that's what students love about my class. We are all very, very present in the moment. And again, it's a little more effort, a little bit more work, and I feel that, but it also feels spiritually and emotionally fulfilling to be part of something that is growing and changing and moving. So the more numbers, the more things I have to look at and hit, the less I'm able to just respond, because the more I'm forcing an outside idea into what we've already created as this snowball that's been rolling.
Yeah, I want to be very careful to not put words in your mouth, but what I think I'm hearing is that specificity at that sort of curricular level could be a constraining factor on your ability to like respond to students in a way that feels right in your program.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Yep.
Okay.
Perfect.
You also mentioned that curriculum is not a series of lessons and referenced people having an approach where everything is set and sequenced. Is this related to what you were talking about before of it's not that lessons are not important, but the series or sequencing of them is something that you're referencing?
Yeah. Again, it's stuff that I do, and I don't even talk about it, but I think about it all the time, so
Uh-huh.
regularly, and I try to match it up with what I know about sociology and psychology so that it matches. The idea of transitions is very important, and I think that's applicable everywhere. That's applicable in an individual lesson where you want to be able to get from your intro to your body, to an outro in a way that feels natural, which everybody works on. But I think that we need to expand that idea. So not only should each individual day feel like that, but the unit should feel like that, where every
Mm.
transition feels right. But then your entire semester should feel like that. Because I think transitions are what make music good. It's what makes writing good. It's what makes a speech good. Getting from one point to the next without feeling that jolt. So when I'm talking about what's important, I throw out a project to kids at the beginning of the semester. I say, here's a project. And it's a bit of a guess. It's based on
Hmm.
what I've done with the kids. And that's when I start that train chugging. And then I say, okay, well, I need to stay on these tracks. So what feels natural? And then, the semester ends up having transitions because the units have transitions, because the lessons have transitions, because the way I present has transitions. I hope that covered what you were asking.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a way of thinking. I'm very much aligned with your approach, but I think when I look across the field, it's actually less typical. It's a less typical approach, what we're talking about here, because of the scope and sequence playing such a dominant role in people's imaginations of what curriculum could be. I've been actually playing around with what are some other metaphors we could use other than scope and sequence as the sort of dominant thing. You talked about curriculum being through composed a bit earlier. Do
Mhm.
you have any thoughts of, if not scope and sequence, then
Oh, as a vernacular, as like a words to put on it.
yeah, or a way of thinking? Because what I'm hearing from you is you're not thinking in terms of a scope, and there is a scope because there's a year, but it's more of a set of possibilities related to what students need, which is different than a scope and sequence, which lays out here's the set of things that I'm going to teach, and here's the order in which I'm going to teach them. So you're approaching it in a different way.
Yeah, no, and I hear what you're saying. I'm just, having the wheels turn. I'll just keep throwing out metaphors until they stop coming out. I don't know if that works out for you, but clearly this is the way
Yeah,
I keep
well,
going.
it's my responsibility to eventually write this all up and come up with the thing anyway, but
I feel like it's more like jazz, I guess. You don't say what comes next. You have a general format for what you're doing, and
uh-huh.
you know what you want to present, but it's 100% based on listening to people around you and doing what feels like it naturally comes next based on every bit of information as it moves forward. Yeah, so what's another thing where you need to continually get information as you move forward? I guess it's kind of like a science experiment because you know what you want your end goal to be,
Uh-huh.
and you don't quite know what you're starting with, so you throw out a test. And then that test, whether it's positive or negative, leads you towards more tests.
Yeah,
And as the
interesting.
tests continue, you continue to find where the positives and negative are of what you have and what you need. And then you try to fill up all those needs until you can find your way to that end goal.
Yeah.
It's the same as an improv scene, I guess, too. An improv scene, all these things where you're having to create something with an end goal in mind, where you say, I know I need to get here. How am I going to get there? I'm starting from here. And then you take a step. It's like Indiana Jones. I told you it's going to keep going. It's like
Right.
Indiana Jones. There's the whole chasm there, right? And you take that first step and you're like, I hope that this is a good step. And if it's not, you try to catch yourself. And then you say, based on the step I took, where's my next step? Where's the next place that I can put my foot? And then as you keep going, it becomes more and more obvious because you have data and that data is not written down. God, it's not written down, but it's in my head. You know what I mean? I have it in my notes, obviously, but I keep saying, "Oh, if that step worked and this step worked, all of a sudden, oh, that's my path." I just couldn't see it when I started.
Yeah. I mean, you wrote also about this idea of trying new things, like allowing, I think this was in relationship to administrators or teachers. Teachers should try new things and administrators should let teachers try new things. And it seems like this is an ethic both for your students and for yourself. Can you just speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I had a time a bit ago that somebody had asked me we got guitars and they said, "Can you
Hmm.
write guitar curriculum?" And I said, "Sure, I love it." So I did the first semester as a pilot program that was more regimented because it was the
Hmm.
first time I was doing something. I said, "Let me just see." I had never taught guitar to a group of, 25, 30 kids before. So I said, "Let me just make some." So I made exactly what you would think it's going to be. Hey, everybody, here's the chord. Here's my fingers. I like had my phone up there and I FaceTimed my own laptop and I like, you know what I mean? I didn't have a thing to use so they could see it. And we did that. So the first semester was very regimented. For the second semester, I pushed the boundaries of what it was to be able to have executive functioning skills in a classroom where students were more able to approach a goal they wanted. So I had some students who said, "I want to learn, Eruption by Van Halen." And I said, "Dude, go after it." So I had a
Hmm.
lot of space in class where students were able to find music they wanted to do. The benefit was a lot of students really got to find that. It's like classes are usually in thirds. A third of the kids are getting after it. A third of the kids are doing what you said because you said it. And a third of the kids are like, "You got to make me do it." It's a lot of classes work like that.
Hmm.
Maybe 10, 80, 10, depending on the town you're in or the school you're in or the time of year, but things change over time.
Sure.
Anyway, so I was doing this and I did have a third of the kids who struggled. And what I found out was they needed a little bit more structure. They didn't have anything they wanted. They didn't want to learn guitar. So they would still do it, but it wasn't with gusto. So my job was essentially saying, "Okay, I gave you too many opportunities. You wanted that little bit of, here are 3 songs to choose from." But the person came in as an administrator and just gave me so many bad reviews that went on my
Uh,
record. And I was like, "You asked me to create a curriculum by
yeah.
myself for free so that I
Uh-huh.
could pilot a program for you. And I've now done it successfully for sure. But now I'm pushing the limits of what I want. And that's the only way to find out what's useful." And again, it was very useful for students. I would just adjust it in the future. But
Yeah.
all of a sudden, like for students, if we give them a project and say, "Yeah, get after it and do your best thing," and then I go, "I don't like it," C, they're like, "Wait a minute. Is it be creative and find what is the truth and find the best opportunity? Or is it get the grade you want me to get because you have this predetermined sense of what you want?" So I think it's one of those times when I'd already been doing it, but a reaffirmation of what I thought, which is people can't grow, create, and find an honest reality and truth unless you give them the freedom and the lack of anxiety to do so. As soon as you start throwing in grades, they're going to say, "Oh, so we're not being creative. We're playing a game that you've set up for us, and I need to find out the rules of this game." It's a little bit all or nothing. And I think some people miss that. They go, "Be as creative as you want, as long as it's the way I want it." And I'm like, "That's not creative then." So just like I would ask them to trust me as an educator, I trust my students to say, "I don't see what you're doing yet, but I want you to go for it." And I will tell you, 99 times out of 100, it's pretty much all the time. These students come back with something that they love, something they've discovered that I didn't plan, and something that I'm very glad I did not infringe upon because I
Mhm.
would have just changed it into something that I wanted.
I love what you're saying. I'm thinking about the teachers, our colleagues who are just, I'll use the word scared, nervous. I don't know what the right word is to use yet, but to move into this more open space because of either I won't know what to do or I won't be able to cover the things on my curriculum. What might you say to folks to help them open up a bit more and loosen up some of the specificity or the desire for more specificity in telling them what they need to do in their curriculum?
I think it comes from 3 different places. I think the first one, that's the toughest one to overcome, is administration. If
Mhm.
you have somebody that is telling you you will be fired or put on a plan because you don't follow what they want, there's not much you can do. You're now
Right.
doing a job for money. You're not
Mhm.
educating students. You're a textbook. And I think that it's terrible and it makes me upset because why am I even here? Go online, get AI up. AI can do exactly what you want it to do. It'll just do a really bad job of educating, and they'll all walk away thinking music is mediocre.
Uh-huh.
And again, If that's your administrator and you want to keep that job, you shouldn't do this because I want you to have money and I want you to have food, and that's important. So whatever, do that. If you can get out of that job or convince your administrator that what you're doing is important, that's your first step. The second step is who we are as a musician and a teacher and a level of control and comfort. Some people are afraid that if they stop doing something they're comfortable with, they'll lose control of the classroom, which for some people that can be tenuous. Or, nightmares I've had in the past where I can't control my class in my nightmare because it's just something where I'm like, nobody's doing what I want. That kid just brought in a bazooka. What's happening? It's a nightmare. I'm sleeping and I'm waking up and going, oh my God. But it's fears that we can have sometimes. So approaching that one, I would just say baby steps. I would say set up a project that you normally have that's structured and leave one part vague, but not a part that's going to ruin the students, but maybe just what you want the end result to be. Set them up on the path, get them 4 steps out of 5, you structure. But just step number 5, say, okay, I'm okay with whatever tempo you want, whatever key you want. This is all good, which is also beneficial too. Too vague is bad for students. And the third part is how they are as a person and how comfortable they are with improvising, changing, and adapting. And sometimes people aren't comfortable because they don't do it. I just had the valedictorian and I were just, because I teach public speaking, we were just walking through her speech and everything.
Oh, nice.
And she had me freshman year. So she came back and she's like, oh God, what are we doing? So I was like, I need you to improvise a speech right now. And she is not an improviser. She's the best person in the world, not an improviser. And she knows that. So some people just need help with that. So the 2 things I would recommend for that are, 1, to take a class where you are the students and it has to do with something you have to create, because it's a great reminder of what it is to not know, to be scared, and to approach something. And then 2, to do the same thing I said with the last one, which is just to start a little bit of improvisation. Create your lesson, but don't create one part and leave it up to that moment. And it's wild, but a small moment at first, and just say, don't have an intro. Walk in with no intro. I would never do that. I love intros. It helps me with the transitions. But you know what I'm saying? Whatever you want. Don't have a closing statement. Wait for it. And then just say in the last 10 minutes of class, say, how am I going to close this class out? Small stuff. And then if they're comfortable, have them move in. But we can't force people to do this. We can't push them in. And we can't get anybody doing something they're not comfortable with. But as always, we can ask people to do something out of their comfort zone and then see if that worked for them.
Yeah, I love it. Sean, thank you so much for the conversation. I really appreciated speaking with you, and it's very refreshing to hear these perspectives. Thanks again so much for the time.
No problem. Have a wonderful day.
So a lot of things to chat about. I'm just going to share a couple of takeaways from the interview. One theme that keeps coming back throughout the conversation is Sean sharing that he feels that we really ought to be designing curriculum in relationship to students' needs. And sometimes that comes up in terms of opting to design a curriculum from scratch rather than drawing upon a pre-existing written curriculum. In other cases, it has to do with being flexible in adapting the curriculum towards students' needs. So this idea of centering students and responding to their needs in relationship to curriculum design and development is a really important thing for us to think through. I really love metaphors. And Sean shares several metaphors in the interview. I think they're really fabulous. And I think metaphors can often help us think in refreshing ways about our practice, about curriculum. And so as Sean is describing how he thinks through his curriculum over the course of a year, he uses the metaphor of it being through composed, which I think is really interesting. It's a nice, different kind of approach to organizing curriculum than what we might refer to as a scope and sequence in some cases. A through composed curriculum would maybe look different and would be approached differently. And so I would invite you to explore additional musical metaphors as you think through your own curriculum and curriculum development. One of the metaphors he uses is like this kind of Indiana Jones approach. And if you've never watched the movie, I think rather than me explaining what my takeaway is from that, I would say, if you haven't seen the movie, go watch the movie and then see if you could figure out what Sean's talking about in terms of curriculum. He also talks about curriculum being like an improv scene. He talks about curriculum being like a science experiment. So all of these metaphors are, I think, really helpful for us to think through. And I would encourage you not necessarily to adopt one of the metaphors that Sean uses, although that's great if that is useful to you, but to think about your own metaphors and the ways that you think about curriculum. I think metaphors, especially ones that get away from geometric shapes like boxes and grids, can be really helpful for imagining possibilities of our curriculum and our teaching and our programs. Another thing that Sean shares with us a couple times is this idea of openness and vagueness of standards. And he frames this as positive. There are a lot of folks across the field who, when they speak about the openness or vagueness of language of standards, they are saying that because they want something much more specific. And Sean is sharing that the openness and vagueness of standards sometimes leaves space for him to move them in ways that make the most sense for his program and for students. And this is an interesting thing that will come up throughout, I imagine, multiple episodes throughout the trajectory of this podcast, are these tensions and differences of perspectives when it comes to how much clarity and specificity should we have in curriculum and how much openness and space for possibility should we have in curriculum. And when it comes to openness and specificity, I definitely locate myself somewhere along in that continuum that perhaps I'll share in another episode or in my newsletter, not today. But it's something to think about in terms of your own perspectives around degree of specificity of standards, degree of specificity of curriculum. So something for you to think about. One of the things that Sean talks about in relationship to this sort of through composed approach to curriculum and this more open, flexible approach to curriculum is for students to develop a sense of independence and agency. And I think it's interesting for us to think about, independence, agency, they're not exactly the same thing. But when you hear the word agency, what does that mean to you? And when you think about your program, when you think about your teaching, how does students' agency, or how does any particular student's agency or students' agency as sort of like a group factor or relate to your teaching, the way you think about curriculum, your curriculum design? There's a lot to talk about in terms of student agency and what that even means. I'm not going to answer that right now, but I'm throwing it out there because I think a lot of people have perspectives on this. And there's a lot of really good thinking in the field around student agency and what that means for us as teaching. What does it mean to you? I just love this sense of like the possible that just keeps coming out of the ways that Sean talks about curriculum. I imagine some of you would also find that exciting. And then I imagine some of you might find that kind of curious about like, what does that look like and how would I go about doing that? I think that's a really wonderful thing about this project and just the field is that there are so many different perspectives about how we might approach curriculum, how we might design curriculum. So far, this is just episode 2, so much there, and there are so many more episodes coming. I hope you got something out of this. I'm curious about your perspectives. I'll catch you in the next episode. Have a good one. So much to think about. What's just one step you might take in the near future? For further reflection and planning, you can access show notes and references at evantobias.net/podcast. If you want to explore more of these types of themes, dig deeper, or spark movement forward, join my music ed newsletter at evantobias.net. The newsletter provides more of my own perspectives, along with resources, current issues and topics related to music education, along with sparks and springboards for your music classes and ensembles, all to support you in designing, updating, expanding, or transforming your music program. Thanks for listening, and until next time, have a good one, and keep imagining possibilities.